The sun hung low yet merciless over the broken spine of the desert, a molten coin hammered against a sky bleached nearly white. Heat shimmered off the plains, bending the horizon into wavering, uncertain shapes. Even the hardy desert brush sagged under the weight of the noon glare, and the few clouds drifting westward seemed like they were fleeing something fierce behind them. Jake Hollister had been riding since sunrise, and every hour felt like it had stretched the length of two. His brown mare, Dulcie, snorted hot air as she plodded forward, each hoof kicking up pale dust that clung to her coat and Jake's boots. Sweat trickled down Jake's temples, disappearing into his stubble. He tugged on the reins slightly, slowing her pace. He wasn't in a hurry, not really. Not since he'd become a man with nowhere urgent to be. Easy now, he muttered, patting Dulcie's neck. Ain't no one rushin' us these days. He'd spoken that reassurance mostly for his own benefit, to remind himself that he had left behind all the things that used to push him across wild country with bullets at his back. The Hollister that rode now was supposed to be a different man, one who'd traded in outlaw dust for quieter trails. But shadows tended to cling to a man even after he swore he'd stepped into the light, and Jake could never quite shake the feeling that something still followed him, distant but persistent. He touched the brim of his sweat-stained hat, lowering it against the glare. Deadman's Gulch was still hours away, and water even farther. The desert stretched so wide and so empty that a man could disappear in it without leaving even a whisper behind. Maybe that was why he noticed her. At first he figured the shape lying beside the boulder was a trick of the shimmering heat, just another false oasis woven by sunlight and exhaustion. But as he rode closer, the outline sharpened. A person. A woman, slumped sideways with her back to the stone, wide-brimmed hat shadowing her face, clothing torn in places where fabric had snagged against rock or thorn. Her hair was wind-matted and long, escaping beneath the hat in dark curls. Her horse was nowhere in sight. Jake slowed Dulcie to a stop. Something in his chest tightened. There were rules in the desert, older than lawmen, older than the frontier itself. A person in trouble got help, that was just the way of things. Even snakes spared each other when water was scarce. He dismounted, boots hitting the sand with a muted thud. He approached with caution, though not suspicion. People caught between life and death could startle like wounded animals. "Ma'am," he called out softly. "You all right?" The woman didn't respond at first. Her shoulders rose faintly with breath, but her head didn't lift. Jake took another step, then crouched beside her. Her skin was sun-flushed, cracked at the lips. Her jacket was dusty, the color indistinguishable under the desert grime. She looked like she'd been out here for days. "Ma'am," he said again, lowering his voice further, "I got water. Can I offer you some?" This time she shifted. Slowly. Painfully. She lifted her head enough for him to briefly see her face. A glimpse was all he got, but it was enough to notice the sharpness of her features beneath the exhaustion, the set of her jaw, and eyes that despite squinting against the sun held the steadiness of someone fighting to stay conscious. "Water," she rasped. Jake straightened and unhooked his canteen. Her voice alone had told him she was on the edge. He'd seen and heard thirsty men before. Usually they grasped for a drink like drowning men lunging for air. He held the canteen out. "Here," he said. "Take small sips. Too much at once'll." But the woman didn't follow his advice or even attempt to. She took the canteen, yes, but instead of raising it to her lips she let it rest loosely in her hand, almost carelessly, as if the effort of lifting it was too heavy or as if she were considering whether she even wanted it. "You look like you've been out here a spell," Jake said, eyeing her suspicion creeping in around the edges of concern. "Where's your horse? And what in God's name brought you so far out without supplies?" She stared at the canteen in her hand. Not with desperation. Not with relief. More like someone evaluating a tool for a job she had yet to explain. Then her eyes lifted, meeting his square on. There was nothing weak about her gaze. "My horse is gone," she said. "Shot." Jake blinked. "Shot. Not lost, not spooked, not wanderin' off. Shot." "That's so," he murmured cautiously. "You in some kinda trouble, ma'am?" She pushed herself upright, using the rock for support. She wasn't trembling. Not much, anyway. Not enough for a person supposedly dying of thirst. "My husband and I were headed toward the Granite Ridge Trail," she said. Her voice steadied with each word, the rasp fading. "We were ambushed by 3 riders. They shot my horse and took his life." Jake felt a chill slip down his spine despite the desert heat. I'm sorry to hear that, he said sincerely. You said, we're ambushed. Where's your husband now? Buried, she answered simply. Not far from where they left us. Jake swallowed. The desert was brutal, but murder was a different kind of cruelty. You trackin' the ones who did it? He asked. Her lips lifted faintly, not quite a smile. More like the memory of one belonging to someone who didn't smile anymore. I was. Until I needed help. Jake shifted back a little without realizing it, unsettling dust around his boots. Well, he said slowly, you've found me. I can take you to town, get you seen by a doc, get the sheriff. No sheriff, she cut in sharply. I don't need a lawman. Jake frowned. Ma'am, if you're planning on writing down 3 killers on your own, you might want to. She stood fully then, rising with a steadiness he shouldn't have expected. The desert sun caught her face, and for the first time he saw the full expression she'd been hiding. There was no desperation, no gratitude. The thirst she carried was not for water. Her eyes were lightning, bright, angry, unquenched. You ain't given me your name, Jake said quietly, and he wasn't sure why, except that something cold was unfurling in his chest. She let the canteen fall. It hit the sand softly, water sloshing inside. My name is Clara Boone, she said. Jake felt time pause. Boone. The name struck him like a fist. Your husband, he said slowly. Boone. Marshall Boone. She nodded once. Marshall Boone. The same lawman who had hunted Jake's gang across 3 territories. The same man who almost caught them, almost ended them, before they'd turned on him. Jake hadn't pulled the trigger, but he hadn't stopped it either. His gut twisted. He opened his mouth to speak, to explain something he wasn't sure he believed anymore, but Clara was already reaching behind her back. Her hand closed around a gun he hadn't seen sheathed there. Jake's hand instinctively drifted toward his holster. Don't, she warned. Her revolver was already leveled at his chest. She held it steady, calm as a rattlesnake ready to strike. Ma'am, he said slowly, keeping his hands in the air, whatever you think. I think, she said coldly, that you used to ride with the men who murdered my husband. Jake's throat tightened. I left that life behind. I swear to you, Clara, I ain't done outlaw work in years. Clara's eyes didn't soften. Funny. Revenge don't care about retirement. They stood like that for several long seconds. The wind whispered through the brush, lifting grains of sand that stung Jake's cheeks. His breathing was the only sound between them. You gonna shoot me? He asked, voice barely above a whisper. Right here, without hearing a damn thing from me about who I am now. She didn't answer. Not with words. But something flickered across her face, something Jake couldn't read. Doubt. No. Calculation. She took a half step back, eyes still locked on him. Then the faint thunder of hooves echoed from beyond the ridge. Clara's gaze flicked toward the horizon. Jake turned his head slightly. 3 riders. 3 men. Dust trailing behind them like comet tails. Jake knew those silhouettes instantly. The way each one sat a saddle, the lazy tilt of their shoulders, the swagger in their pace even at a distance. He felt the bottom of his stomach drop. His old gang. Every instinct in Jake screamed at him. To run, to hide, to draw, to prey, something. But before he could do anything, Clara's expression changed entirely. She smirked. You see, she said quietly, gun still trained on him. You brought exactly what I needed. Jake's eyes widened. Wait, you ain't dying of thirst at all. No, she said, but I needed someone they'd come after. Realization crashed into him like a runaway horse. She hadn't been helpless. She hadn't stumbled into the desert lost. She had put herself here deliberately. She had used him as bait. Jake cursed under his breath. He'd played right into it, from the moment he'd seen her slumped against the rock. She'd known the gang would track him if he ever drifted too close to their territory again. She'd known they'd never forgive a deserter. And she'd waited for them in the open, using him as the lure they couldn't resist. Clara, he said, taking a careful step back, you don't know what you're about to do. These men, they killed my husband, she said. I know exactly what I'm about to do. Her finger tightened on the trigger. The hooves grew louder, closer. Jake swallowed hard. You ain't getting out of this alive if you go up against all 3. That's fine, she said. Long as I take them with me. He saw it then, the real thirst burning in her. Rage so fierce it had kept her alive in a place where people died in hours. Vengeance so full it had replaced water in her veins. Jake drew a breath. Let me help you. She hesitated. Just barely. Why? Because I owe him, Jake said. For not stoppin' what happened. For not bein' the man then that I'm tryin' to be now. Clara's brow furrowed the smallest bit. Her grip on the gun didn't loosen, but something shifted in her eyes. A single heartbeat stretched between them. Then the outlaws crested the ridge. And everything exploded.